How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is RuffledRowlit, and today I want to talk about specifically what the next game is going to be for Pokemon in 2024. Now, in this video, I'm going to be specifically talking about why I think it might be a UNOVA game, but I'll have another video where I'm going to talk about why it might be a Johto game. So please stay tuned. I'll be making two videos on this, and in the end, I'll be combining both videos and doing an overarching view on which two it might be. But in this video, I specifically want to go and talk about why the next game in 2024 might be UNOVA. So let's get started with the first thing. Number one, there are actually multiple hints by the leaker. So the leaker RuffledRowlit, if you guys do not know him, he's a legitimate leaker. He's been giving out multiple hints towards it being UNOVA, or at least like some of the stuff he's been saying has been kind of hinting towards that. Now, he's not alone in this. There's also been Chinese riddlers and Chinese leakers, and if you don't know what I mean by this, basically the Pokemon community has a very large amount of like these people that just kind of give out information, and some of these are known as these Chinese uncles or Chinese aunties or whatever you want to call them, and they're people that are over in China who have leaks and information, and they put it on a website called Tieba Baidu. Now the thing is, they've been posting a lot of stuff, so it's a little bit hard to know exactly what's going on. But one of them, one person that I think was verified, and I again, don't quote me on this, but I think one of the people that was verified for this actually came out and said that, hey, the next game is going to be a UNOVA game, and it's going to be a Paradox sort of game. There's also another person that was saying stuff that didn't have legitimate information, but the actual person that had legit info did come out and say that, hey, we're going to be getting ourselves some sort of I don't know, I guess some sort of game that's going to be a Paradox version of UNOVA. But that was the people that were the Chinese leakers. Those are not the only people that we're talking about. We also have RuffledRowlit. Now, RuffledRowlit hasn't outright said, oh, the next game is going to be Pokemon, UNOVA games. He hasn't outright said it, but he has been hinting at it, right? I'll see if I can find a few examples here on the screen to show you guys, but RuffledRowlit has been tweeting a lot, so it's kind of hard to, to find any good examples. But he usually tweets the stuff on Twitter, and if we just look up RuffledRowlit and we go and search for anything that he's been posting, RuffledRowlit Black and White Remakes, if you like just Google that on YouTube, or sorry, Google that on Twitter, and just look it up and just search it up, you'll see that he has a lot of posts that seem to be hinting at that. So one of the biggest posts is probably this one, which says, what's on your wish list? Place your bets. Let's go UNOVA, Pokemon Legends Kyurem, Black and White 3, or Paradox UNOVA, right? And then he kind of responded to that tweet saying, ooh, seems like a lot of people like Legends games. But yeah, so he included 4 options here. Let's go UNOVA, Legends Kyurem, Pokemon Legends Kyurem, Black and White 3, and Paradox UNOVA. Now keep in mind, this guy is a legitimate leaker, right? He does leak legitimate stuff. So just please keep that in mind. He actually has real information, hence why I'm even bringing him up. Otherwise, I wouldn't even mention him, but he does have real info. So the fact that he's saying stuff like this means that it's heavily possible that one of these 4 things could happen. Now, out of all these 4, Let's go UNOVA, Pokemon Legends Kyurem, Black and White 3, Paradox UNOVA, out of all those 4 options, right? I will talk about which kind of game I think it's going to be at the end of this video, which sort of game, but out of those, it seems to me like the most logical one is a Paradox UNOVA game. Now, what do I mean by Paradox UNOVA game? Well, a version of UNOVA that isn't really what we remember. Like, it's still UNOVA, but different. Similar to if you guys have played the Indigo Disc, there are locations in the Indigo Disc. There's actually a whole place in the Indigo Disc that is based on a, I think, a resort area, with the area where you can find Shiny Haxorus, in the original Black and White games, or in Black and White, right? And this whole place, like literally on the map, is based on that, which is really cool. And I think that's kind of what you should imagine. It's not going to be a regular UNOVA the way you remember it. It's going to be a version of UNOVA that is different. Either a UNOVA set in the future, or a UNOVA set in the past, or a UNOVA that's just different from what we know. Kind of imagine Pokemon Legends Arceus, right? Which was set in the past, sort of. Imagine instead a game set in the future, where everything is a bit different as well. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say here. It's like whatever this game is, it's going to be one of these 4 most likely, and the fact that he tweeted this, keep in mind, he's a legitimate leaker. He doesn't put the stuff out unless he has a reason to put it out, and he did specifically put this out there, which is very, very, very strange. So I thought I would mention that really quick, because he is a legitimate source. So he is the one thing I would bring up as being a big reason as to why this might happen. The next thing, though, is that he also said original soup, original taste. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, basically, original soup, original taste was a tweet which was supposed to be kind of a joke, to joke about specifically what the Chinese were referring to Pokemon Diamond and Pearl remakes. So BDSP were basically called original soup, original taste, which is supposed to be sort of an idiom, sort of a way of like saying that, like, oh, like almost like in a jokey way, supposed to be saying like, oh, this is supposed to be a original like game, like, you know, it's original taste, the same way you remember it, but people might not like that, right? It was supposed to be a joke, I think, either in the Chinese community or the Japanese community, that people are like, yeah, Diamond and Pearl remakes were ass because they made them too faithful almost, right? And that's kind of what the joke was here. I could be totally wrong about the way I'm putting it, but that's more or less the general gist of it. So that's kind of what we have to work with on that regard. I don't really know if there's much else to say about that in particular, but it is just worthwhile mentioning, right? I think it's worth bringing it up and just recalling to it. So just keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that things can change, right? But some of the stuff that he has been saying here, for example, is there's another post where he talks about specifically what is the paradox of black and white. And then he said the Chinese uncle leaked. And, you know, specifically it was somebody saying here, it is a game developed by Game Freak themselves. And it's not a Legend series game. It can be understood as Black and White 3, which is, again, super weird. But that came from a Chinese uncle, which I don't think has been confirmed to be real. I think that information from that Chinese uncle was the one that was fake, or if not fake, at least it wasn't like corroborated properly. But that's pretty much all I know in regards to that, though. Now I want to move on to the next topic, which is going to be all the references to UNOVA. So this is the big one, right? This is the one I think is the biggest one. So it's one thing listening to leakers, unless they provide direct proof for it, or unless there's somebody who's trusted like Riddler Coup, it's kind of hard to trust anything that's being said. However, one thing we can trust is the references to Pokemon stuff and UNOVA in the official Pokemon games. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, if you've been playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, if you played the Indigo Disc in particular, you may have noticed there's a lot of references to UNOVA. And when I say a lot of references, I mean so many that there are literal videos that are like 20 minutes long worth of it. I'm even going to be making a video of my own talking about the UNOVA and Johto references, which you can find in Indigo Disc and also in Kitakami, because I thought it was really cool how there's a bunch of references there to both regions, which is very, very strange. But what am I talking about? Well, basically, there are references. Certain characters, like for example, Drayton is literally related to Drayden, right? And then, of course, that's one example. You also have Lacey, who's related to another gym leader. You've got, like, basically all the characters are related to someone from UNOVA. But that's not all. There's also locations in here that are related to it. There's music. Even if you actually go into your club room and you change the decor in your room, you can literally see UNOVA decor, like a black and white decor. You can see the Pokemon Hollywood. I'm not sure if you call it like Pokemon Hollywood, but the Pokestar Studios. If you guys remember the Pokestar Studios, there's a literal reference directly to that. Like, it's not even a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. It's like direct references. And I'm giving you just like small examples, but there's massive amounts of stuff. I mentioned earlier, if you actually play Pokemon, you know, the Indigo Disc, there's actually a location where you can find a Terra version or a Terra Haxorus, right? That's just walking around. Funny thing, that whole location, if you look at it from above on the map, looks exactly like the same location, the resort area, I think, from Pokemon Black and White, right? It looks like the resort area from there where you can find a shiny static Haxorus walking around, which is literally just a direct reference. And again, this is not all. There's references as well inside of the school. There's references again in the club room. There's references in the music. If you walk around, you can even get Route, I think 106, I'm not sure if it's 106, but Route 6 music is, for example, from like Black and White. I think that's what they said. I could be totally wrong on this, but because I don't really play with music on, unfortunately, so that's just my own fault. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is, there's loads of little references like this. There's loads of little things that just exist in here that are references directly to Black and White. And again, I'm giving you the surface level stuff. I'm really, really, really like not digging deep here. I'm giving you very much the top of the you know, like really on the top of the top here. I'm not giving you the deepest stuff. Like for example, if we go through some of the stuff here, we also have Crispin, who's related to the 3 elemental like monkey brothers. So Chili, Ceylon, and Cress. He actually is related to them. Hassel's clan is related in some way to Drayton's family. You got the Galarian style throw is Leon's throwing style, so that's a reference to Galar specifically. But you, for example, have Secret Meloetta event, right? Like, okay, Meloetta is a Gen 5 Pokemon, and there's a reference to it here too, which is nuts. That's one of them. The Monochrome style League Room has a lot of things, like you've got the cities in the background, you know, you've got Castelia City, you've got the giant forest, you've got the Sky Arrow Bridge paintings and stuff like that, which is crazy. Like I said, Lacey's related to Clay from Driftville City's gym, and then you also have like the Cleavor on top of the mountain in the canyon biome with the black augurite looking rocks all around it, which could also be a reference to the fact that Lacey and and of course Clay, maybe they saved that one, like, because or rather their ancestor who is related to them saved it, and then they took care of it here. So that's a possibility. There's another one that's for Johto specifically, which is a sports ball, which is specifically for the Johto bug catch contest that you are given by parent in this game, or by the item printer in the league room, which is pretty nuts. And yeah, there's just a lot of stuff like that. There's just a lot of things like that. There's a lot of items as well you can get your hands on, which are related to certain places. But I think that the most references are to UNOVA here. And specifically in the Indigo Disc, it's a lot of UNOVA relationships, which makes sense because the actual location of the school is specifically located in UNOVA. Like, the actual school is in UNOVA, just off the coast of it somewhere, which we don't know exactly, which makes me wonder, is it possible that we might even not get a UNOVA game, but rather this was supposed to be our little UNOVA taste that all we're going to get, which I don't think is the reason, but again, who knows. For the most part, though, there are a lot of references in the games, and you might be wondering, okay, first of all, what do the games have to do with anything? What do the games have to do with what's going to come next? Like, that's just what's in one game. That shouldn't be related to what's coming next. Except you'd be wrong. Pokemon loves to leave hints. They love to leave little hints for what's to come next, right? For example, Scarlet and Violet were already hinted in Sword and Shield, where in one specific room, there are oranges and grapes on the walls, which is super small, super insignificant. You would never think about it, but that's not at all. There is a bunch of small stuff that's all over the place. Like the souvenir back in Black and White was a hint towards things to come later down the line. Again, there's a lot of references. There's even a Dynamax, I think, poster in Sword and, in Sun and Moon. There's a Dynamax poster that hinted at Dynamaxing or Gigantamaxing even in Pokemon, Sword and Shield. So again, my point is there's a lot of references. There is no way to avoid the fact that there are a lot of references, a lot of them, in these games that hint towards what's to come next. And UNOVA is just plastered all over the place. But I will say, Johto does get a lot of attention as well. There's a lot of Johto references. They're a bit smaller, but there's loads of them all over the place. And more of them in Kitakami than there are here. And there's also even like UNOVA references back in Kitakami too. But in the Indigo Disc, it is chock full of UNOVA relations and UNOVA related things, which is pretty nuts. And also another thing you got to think, you got to keep in mind is that, the most logical thing to come next would also be Johto and UNOVA. One of those two would make the most sense in terms of remakes. And also, gotta remember, we have to talk about what else is supposed to happen here. Like, what is the actual time frame we're working with? So let's actually go into that right now. What is the time frame we're working with here? So keep in mind, now when we're talking about this stuff, when we're talking about Pokemon releases and stuff, you gotta remember that Pokemon games have been releasing every single year now for the last, I don't even know, since basically Sun and Moon came out. So what would that be, like 2016? So, because if you go back in time, 2015 was the only year that we didn't get a release within the 2010s, right? Because like before that, I think we had a release every single year. So 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, up until like 2015, I think that's when we finally had a break year. But since then, 2016, Sun and Moon, 2017, Ultra Sun and Moon, 2018 was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, 2019 was Sword and Shield, 2020 was specifically the Sword and Shield DLC, so Crown Tundra and Isle of Armor, 2021 was Scarlet and Violet, 2022 was Scarlet and Violet, 2021 actually was BDSP, BDSP, and then 2022 was Scarlet and Violet, and also Pokemon Legends Arceus. Keep in mind, Pokemon Legends Arceus, or Arceus, whatever way you want to put it, actually came out the same year, right? They both came out in the same time. So you can't be saying, it's not possible for us to get two games at the same time. And this is where I want to talk about this, right? Because I think that we're not going to get UNOVA next year. We're going to get it at the start of 2025. I think we're going to get announced in 2024. Same way we got Legends announced, but I don't think it's going to release next year. I think it's going to release very, very early in 2025. Now, why do I say this? Because they've done it before, okay? They've literally done it before, and they've been proven to do it before, and it's very possible they can do it again. So what am I talking about? Well, let's talk about what are the possible things here. Well, first of all, why would I think it might release in 2025? Well, there's one big reason. The 15-year anniversary since Black and White. Now, why do I say this? Well, because Black and White, they released in 2010 in Japan, and by that day, by the 25th, it's going to be, by 2025, it's going to be the 15-year anniversary. Now, you might think, why would they wait to release it then? Well, because they've done similar stuff before, and what I mean by that is they've released specifically remakes and stuff on like special anniversaries. But why do I think that? Well, it's because I think Johto makes more sense to release next year. Now, why do I mean that? Well, basically because Johto is celebrating its 25-year anniversary in the next year, right? In 2024, Johto is celebrating its 25-year anniversary. But meanwhile, Pokemon Black and White are celebrating their 15-year anniversary in 2025, right? So it makes a bit more sense, at least to me, that that would come out at that time frame instead. And again, well, let's just break this down from the beginning, right? So if we go into the next year, into 2024, and they announce, let's say, 1 or 2 games, if they just announce UNOVA, I still don't think it's going to come out in the end of the year, because I still think it makes more sense to fit with the anniversary. Now, personally, I think they're going to announce 2 games. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why would they announce 2 games? That's ridiculous. That's insane. They're never going to do that. Well, they already did that, okay? Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, as well as Pokemon Legends Arceus. Both those 2 games, both of them were announced and came out within a very short amount of time. They both were announced on Pokemon Day in 2021, if I remember correctly. Yes, 2021, they were both announced. Okay, so in 2021, they announced on Pokemon Day in February the 27th, they announced, hey, you're going to be getting Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl and Pokemon Legends Arceus. So that is 2 games, right? Because BDSP, that's just a single game technically. But yes, so BDSP and Legends Arceus are 2 separate games, 2 separate adventures. One is an open world set game for the first time ever, a Legends type game, never seen before, totally new. That was one. And the other one was a remake of Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, a regular, more simple, more basic remake of Pokemon, right? A very basic standard remake. And I think we're going to have the same thing this time. I think next year they're going to announce the same thing. I think we're going to get an announcement first for a Johto game, right? We're going to get a Johto game, something similar to BDSP, something more simple. Gold and Silver are celebrating their 25th year of, since they were created. It's the anniversary. It's the big year. It's the big celebration. So it makes total sense because it's been a long time since we've traveled to Johto. Like Johto, I think, is the only region now that has not been, besides, I guess, Johto and Unova are both the only regions that haven't been represented in 3D in any way or shape or form, right? Because we've gotten, Kanto in 3D. That's with, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. We've gotten Hoenn with Oras. We've gotten Sinnoh with both Legends and also BDSP. And we haven't gotten Gen 5, but then Gen 6 already is in 3D. So yeah. But basically, it's the only one that hasn't been represented in any way. So it hasn't been ported in any sort of way to 3D, right? It's the only game that's missing in that regard. So what I'm trying to say is this. I think they're going to announce Johto, a basic Johto remake. I say Let's Go remake, but when I say Let's Go, I'm not actually talking about a legitimate Let's Go game. But when I say Let's Go, I mean like a more simple game, like a more like a beginner-friendly game, right? A very basic, simple, standard, very easy to understand game is what I'm saying when I say that. So a kind of Let's Go Johto type game, a simple remake, and then the big game for, that's supposed to come out would be almost like a Legends Unova game. Now, when I say Legends, I don't really think it's even going to be a Legends game. I think it's going to be a Paradox game. I think it's going to be a paradoxical game, a game that is a bit weird. It's going to be a game that isn't really a remake of Unova, but rather a game that is some sort of, kind of future set game and stuff like that. And as for when they both release, I think it's going to work like this, and this is my exact prediction. I think they're going to announce both of them on February the 27th for Pokemon Day. They announce both games, and then they tell us, okay, one of these games is slated for a 2024 release, and the other game's for 2025. And then they're going to, let us know. Johto this year, so 2024. And then they're going to say Unova for 2025. Now, people might be thinking that, when will the Unova game come out? If it does get announced, right? If both get announced. Well, most likely very early into the next year. The reason I say this is because in 2025, I think we're going to have the same situation that we have when Scarlet and Violet came out. Because people seem to forget this, and it really bothers me, and it really annoys me that people don't realize this. But Scarlet and Violet came out in the same year as Legends Arceus. I think people just don't think about that much. They just forget it because time's been going so fast lately. But Legends Arceus came out at the beginning, right? Like in January of 2022. And Scarlet and Violet were announced like not even a month later in February. Like, right, they were barely a month and a half later, they announced that we're going to be getting Scarlet and Violet in the same year. And people were like, no, I remember when they were about to announce it, most of us thought it's not going to happen. Most people thought it was going to be a Legends Arceus DLC year, like we might get a Legends Arceus DLC. But no, we got a whole new generation, which made sense because they were sticking to their schedule. What I mean by schedule is Pokemon games follow a specific strict schedule. They actually go in a certain pattern, right? What I mean by this is that when Pokemon games are being released, they basically go in an order of like every like 3 years, there's going to be a new generation. So it works like as follows. And let's use an example of specifically, let's use Generation 7. So Generation 7 is the Sun and Moon year. That generation followed the 3-year pattern, right? The game releases in 2016. That's the first year. 2017 is the second year. That's when Ultra Sun and Moon came out. So that's usually the follow-up game. And the follow-up game is usually like a third version. But nowadays, they don't do third versions. Now they actually do the DLC instead. So instead of that, you know, they just go that way. And then following that, they do some sort of remake game or some sort of game that just isn't normal, a little bit different. In this case, for Generation 7, the actual final game for Gen 7 was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. That was the final game for that generation. And then you moved on to the next thing. So in case of this, let's use Sword and Shield, right? Sword and Shield is a good example you can use for actually a bit of a weird one as well, because you do have Legends, but nonetheless, here's the way you would put it. So Sword and Shield was the first games. They started the whole thing, right? They were the first games that came out. They were Gen 8 games, right? Then after them, you had the second year, so they came out in 2019. Then 2020 was the year, so that's the second year. That's when the DLC came out, so that's year 2. And then year 3 is when BDSP came out. And I guess if you want to count Legends Arceus, it does bleed into 2020, you know, the next year after that, which was 2022. It does bleed into that, but nonetheless, the usual cycle is 3 years, right? That's the usual cycle they run on. It's usually 3 years. So if we look at Scarlet and Violet right now, what are we working with? Well, exactly the same thing. We had Scarlet and Violet in 2022, right? In 2023, we had the DLC, right? So we had DLC just now, Indigo Disc and, you know, the Teal Mask. Those were the ones for the second year. And next year is the last year. So in 2024, we have the last year of Scarlet and Violet and this generation. Like this gen is over after next year. It's done. And we're going to move into the next generation. So I think next year makes most sense to do a final game to finish things off. Johto and, I guess, Unova. But Unova might release the same way Legends did, which is early bleeding into the next year. And the reason they probably do this is to make sure that everything fits in, and so that they can keep people excited and people buying and spending money and all that kind of stuff. Because I don't know how Legends was, if it was rushed or not. It was a bit of a weird game where it was placed. And I think that might end up happening again. We might get another weird placement, like very early into 2025. We might get the last game. And usually it's supposed to only be like 3 games per generation. But now, because of the whole Legends thing that happened, it kind of messed things up and made things a little bit different. But for the most part, the schedule should still stay the same. It shouldn't really change, and it probably won't change because it has stayed the same. It's a 3-year cycle, and then there's a new generation. So in 2025, most likely we might get at the start of the year the actual Unova game, and then the rest of the year we have to just play that game until they release and they announce in 2025 the actual next generation, which is going to be Generation 10, right? So that's the way I pretty much view this. I think that the way this is going to go in terms of what's going to happen is Johto next year, and then early 2025 we might get Unova game, or I could be wrong, and it actually might end up just being only a Unova game or only a Johto game next year, and that's it. And then in 2025, they announce the next generation. Because I'm telling you, 2025 has to be next gen, because it's going to be 3 years since Scarlet and Violet have, been finished. Like, it's going to be the end of those games. It's going to be the end of their era. Their generation is over. They need to move on to the next thing. And I think the way I've actually explained it might be the best way they can go about it. Now, again, I could be wrong, but that's the way I view it. So I want to know your guys' thoughts and opinions. But now let's talk about what kind of game will this Unova game actually be? Like, what sort of game are we looking at here? Well, let's talk about that. So, let's talk now about what sort of game are we going to expect here. Well, I think this is pretty straightforward, but I think it's between 3 sort of games that we can get here. Either a remake, a remaster of sorts, or a Paradox game. Now, when I say Paradox, I'm talking something similar to Pokemon Legends Arceus, right? So a Legends game, I guess, is the best way to put it. But basically, the way that things have been hinted by all the leakers and stuff makes it very confusing as to what it's going to be. Some people are saying, oh, it's going to be just a simple remake. Some people are saying it's going to be a Paradox of Black and White, right? It's going to be something different. It's going to be a game that is developed by Game Freak, but a game that's going to have a bit of a different look to it. And then there's those who are saying it might be just a Let's Go Unova game. It's between these 4 options. Is it a Let's Go Unova? Is it a Pokemon Legends Kyurem? Is it a Black and White 3? Or is it a Paradox Unova? Now, if it's a Black and White 3 in particular, what does that even mean? What does it being a Black and White 3 game mean? Is it just a sequel? to Black and White 2? Does it continue it? Will the graphics look the same? No, probably not. The graphics will be 3D. But just exactly what is this game? Is it supposed to be a continuation? Is it supposed to be a remake? Is it supposed to be a faithful remake? Is it supposed to be something else? Again, it's not very clear what this game is supposed to be, at least based on like the rumors and stuff. It's not being very, very clear on what we're supposed to get here. Now, I'm going to put it like this. I think it's a Paradox game. Now, what do I mean by this? I think it's a game that is set in UNOVA. But again, not the UNOVA we remember. Kind of think about what Legends Arceus is. Legends Arceus is basically Sinnoh, but not, because it's called Hisui. It's set in the past. So I think what we might get is a UNOVA that isn't UNOVA, but it's set in the future. A game that's set further in the future, you know? Like something like that. That's what I think we might be getting. Now, I could be totally wrong, but I want to hear what you guys think about this. Like, this is the one topic which is really hard to talk about because everybody and their mother has a different opinion on what this game could be. Some people think it's going to be just simple black and white remakes. Some people might think it's just going to be something else. Like, again, it's very hard to pinpoint this because everybody has a different thinking way of this. Everybody thinks of it in a different way. Everybody thinks about it in a different sense. I would love to know you guys' thoughts and opinions on this one because I personally think it's going to be a Paradox UNOVA game. I don't think it's going to be a basic remake. I don't think it's going to be a basic remaster. I think it's going to be some sort of paradoxical game. A game that's set in UNOVA, but not really. Similar to Hisui, because if you think about it, Hisui wasn't really, Sinnoh, but it was Sinnoh at the same time. Like, it was Sinnoh of the past, but wasn't even called Sinnoh at the time. It was called Hisui. It had different Pokemon in it, different people there. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, it is the same thing, but it also isn't at the same time, which is basically what a paradox is, right? Both is and isn't at the same time. So, again, I'm not going to go too deep on that because that just might make all of our brains explode. But what I will say is this. I think whatever game we get next year, if it is a UNOVA game, I don't think it's going to be just a standard remake. I don't think you should expect to get a standard remake, and I think the most logical thing, and I don't think calling it Black and White 3 would make the most sense. I could be totally wrong, and I could be totally here, like, get my ass busted by, Game Freak, and you guys might be like, hey, you were wrong, it was called Black and White 3. I just don't expect that to be the case, and the reason I don't think it's going to be called that is because Black and White on its own doesn't carry a lot of weight. And I know you guys might be like, oh, I'm going to kill this guy for saying that, but you got to understand me, okay? Black and White are genuinely the worst selling Pokemon games of all time, okay? And when I say worst selling, I mean worst selling generational games. If you look at every other generation game that came out, like that started a new generation, Black and White are the worst ones, okay? They did awful in sales. They were the worst selling Pokemon games of all time. The worst sales, least amount of money made, everything, okay? It's the worst performing Pokemon generation. I think that it would be very stupid, okay, very dumb from a business perspective to sell these games named Black and White 3. Why do I say this? Because if you were a person who didn't play Black and White 2, which there are a lot of people, okay, I've noticed it in the community lately, there's a lot of new people, there's a lot of younger people that are playing Pokemon and not just us old heads, okay? There's a lot of younger, new generation people that are playing that have no idea about Black and White, that don't know anything about it, they haven't played Black and White, they've only played like maybe X and Y, or not even that, maybe they've only played Sword and Shield, or they started in Scarlet and Violet. My point is, there's a lot of Pokemon that only know the Switch generation of Pokemon games, right? Like the Gen 8 and Gen 9, like Sword and Shield, BDSP, Legends, Scarlet and Violet, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Like, there's people that only know those games. And if you're going to try to sell this game to them, it's the stupidest decision in the world to call the game Black and White 3. Because they need to play Black and White 1 and 2 first before they can even consider playing a game called Black and White 3. Now, of course, they could. That's not like an impossibility. They could, but it also would be very much like, it would just be stupid to not just give it a brand new name that you can sell to everyone. Because then, if you just call it Black and White, and you give an extra naming to it, like think about Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. It's not called Pokemon Diamond 2 and Pearl 2. It's called Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl for a reason. It's a new name. It's still a remake, but it gives it a new name, a new coat of paint, so that even people that don't know anything about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl from before will have a reason to want to go out and buy it, because they won't feel like they're out of the loop. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that everybody feels like they're on point with what they're buying, and not like they're out of the loop and don't know what's going on and don't feel like they fit in. You want to make sure everybody fits in and feels like they can enjoy it for what it is. And that's exactly where I'm trying to get with this. Basically, I think that Pokemon, I think that this game, it's gonna be called something like a brand new name. Like, I don't even think it's gonna have Legends in its name. I don't think it's gonna have anything like that. It's gonna be its own game. Okay, it's gonna be its own game, own name, own everything. It's going to be a very different Pokemon game. I don't expect it to be normal. I don't expect us to be able to put a label on it right now until it comes out. Because once it comes out, then we'll be able to label it. Because keep in mind, we have these labels: Let's Go game, Legends game, mainline game, remake. There's like 4 different labels you can put on Pokemon games. I guess spin-off is another one. You can label them all in a different way. Whatever this game that's being made is, I don't think we can necessarily label it just yet. I think until it gets announced and shown to us, we won't actually have any way of labeling it. We won't have any way of describing it until then. So, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much should summarize that. I don't really know if there's much else to talk about in this topic. Like I said, though, I will have a video. So if you've been watching this, don't worry. If you continue watching right now when I make this video combined with the other one, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about Johto next, right? I'm going to be making a whole separate video for Johto. But if you're watching this video right now when it's been posted as a combined one, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this UNOVA video, I'm going to take the Johto video, I'm going to combine them together into one big video that's going to be posted a few days after these two are posted. And the reason I'm doing that is so that people can get a kind of a nice combined image of these two, where I've talked about both combined. And also at the end of that video, there will be extra bonus stuff I'm going to talk about where I will go a bit more in depth. And I'll also have a podcast out talking about more of these things. But that pretty much just summarizes what my thoughts are on this right now. Like right as of right now, I think UNOVA is a highly possible game based on all the little hints in the games, based on the stuff from the leakers, and based on the other stuff information we have received. So just worthwhile to mention, there is a lot of stuff like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going to be talking about Johto next. I'll see you for the Johto one.